Hey everybody, Charles here with Side by Side Garage, and today we're going to be talking about limit straps. I'm going to discuss with you what a limit strap is, how it pertains to side-by-sides and suspension, why you should put them on your machine, as well as go over a few of the different designs that are out there on the market that are specific to side-by-sides. I'm also going to show you how to fabricate your own personalized kit for your machine that requires a small amount of fabrication and a little bit of welding. That way you can have a custom, fully adjustable limit strap kit on your RZR or your side-by-side. If you guys haven't done so, make sure you click down here in the lower right-hand corner on the little side-by-side garage icon and subscribe to the channel. You can also hit that red button that says subscribe. Make sure you give us a thumbs up. That way we know that you guys like the video and you guys are paying attention. You can find us out there on Facebook at Official Side by Side Garage or on Instagram at Side by Side Garage. That way you guys stay up to date with the latest things that we're working on, as well as when the next video is going to come out. Make sure you guys stay tuned. Limit straps have one main purpose, and that is to prevent damage to either your drivetrain, your suspension, or your steering components. Now, if you are running factory suspension or aftermarket suspension that retains the factory suspension geometry, you should not need a limit strap to prevent damage to your steering or your drivetrain, just because you should not have any sort of binding going on. That does not mean that you don't need limit straps on your machine whenever you have retained that factory geometry. You can actually put limit straps on there to prevent damage to your shocks themselves. Shocks have an internal bump stop in here, similar to how they have out here on the actual shock shaft. So this one on the shock shaft is to prevent damage and reduce that impact whenever the shock goes to full bump or full compression. And then there's that internal bump stop in there so that whenever you go to full droop or your shock tops out, it does not damage this. However, you can still get damage to it, especially if you start adding bigger, heavier tires, bigger, heavier suspension. There's some people out there that think that just because you removed a front sway bar on a RZR, you now need to run limit straps to prevent that axle from pulling out of your front differential. The vast majority of times, that is not the case. If you actually take a measurement of your CV axle whenever it's at full droop, take the shock off, put it up at full compression, take another measurement and compare, you'll find that on RZRs, the axle is actually longer at compression than droop. That means that you're going to pull that CV out of the front differential at compression more likely than you would down there at droop. Also, the factory geometry allows that CV axle to operate within its operating angles so that you should not have any sort of binding or have that axle stretched beyond its means in the first place. So just because you remove the sway bar does not mean you need limit straps for that reason the majority of the time. Now, when it comes to my machine, I don't have a front sway bar anymore. But the reason I'm going to run limit straps is because of that damage factor or preventing the damage to the shock itself. So whenever I do a lot of rock crawling and stuff like that, or snow wheeling, I run large tires. I run 35 and 37 inch tires. Those are big, heavy tires. So every time my front end comes up off the ground, you have all this spring force right here pushing all that weight of that tire and wheel down. And I don't like relying just on that internal bump stop to save that shock from being damaged. If you just start doing some Google searches, you're probably going to find some guys out there that have damaged their shocks because the whole thing just came apart. It's more common than you think. So I don't want to have that damage to the shock because I can put together this kit right here for a few $100 and a shock costs way more than a few $100. The main design for limit strap kits for side-by-sides that's out there is going to be a limit strap, longer shock bolts, and then a little stainless steel spacer. So what that does is space that limit strap out so that the limit strap clears your shock, your spring mounts and all that stuff. There's two reasons I don't particularly like those kits. The first being that they're not adjustable at all. The second reason is because by moving that mounting point out, you're adding leverage. So whenever all this weight comes down, you can actually end up bending that bolt right there. And if you bend that bolt, then you're gonna have a heck of a time getting that bolt out of the shock there anytime you need to pull that shock off the machine. Now, if you are wanting an adjustable limit strap kit, Shock Therapy does make one. Whenever you get those, it comes with a little bracket that comes off of this bottom shock bolt and comes out. That way it moves that limit strap out past your spring and everything, as opposed to using that little spacer. And then up here at the top, it's got a billet aluminum piece that clamps onto your shock body and then comes out past your spring, and then you have an adjustable clevis similar to what I'm using right here on this kit that I put together myself. So those are pretty nice, but they are kind of pricey. I think last time I looked one up, it was like close to 300 bucks just for a front kit, and then you know, close to 300 bucks for a rear kit. So close to $600 range was kind of pricey for a limit strap kit. But I've owned some of their products in the past. They do make nice stuff. So I have no doubt that it's probably nice and well put together. I just personally have not used one. Now, if you can do a little bit of easy fabrication as well as some fairly simple welding, you can put together your own limit strap kit for a little under $250. That's exactly what I did here on this machine, and I'm going to show you exactly how I did it. All right, so I think it's time to dive into the custom limit strap kit that I set up on my 19 Polaris RZR Turbo S 4-seater. Whenever you're gonna make a custom limit strap kit, you gotta figure out where you're going to be mounting it, not only on the frame of the machine, but also on your suspension. So on mine, I decided that I was just going to mount one end of the limit strap to my lower sway bar in-link bolt down here. Now, if you are not running a sway bar at all, then that is a good spot to mount your lower end of the strap. Or if you're running an electronic disconnect sway bar like this one, because the sway bar is always there, it just disconnects in the middle, if you remember from my sway bar video that I did in the past. Now, if you are running a sway bar, but you're using some quick disconnects like those pins, then obviously you can't bolt one end of the strap to that pin right there, because then whenever you're gonna pull it out for rock crawling or whatever, you're not gonna get the use of your limit strap. So in those cases, you might need to like weld a tab or something down here. You could make a bracket off of your lower shock bolt if you wanted, and make the strap come up this way. Something that I thought about doing was putting a tab down here on this end and then running it up there. The reason I didn't do that was because then you have a really long limit strap right here. And in the case of the other side of the machine, that limit strap, whenever you're at like normal ride height or during compression, you know, you get a lot of slack in that strap and it could go over and touch the exhaust over there. So I didn't really like that idea. That's why I ended up just mounting it to this bolt right here. If you're going to mount it to a bolt right there, you want to make sure that you have full engagement of that nylock nut. In the case of using these ORB trailing arms, this is like 1/4-inch plate for these mounts. So it took up all the extra length of that bolt that I had. So I looked online and I found some OEM shock bolts, or excuse me, OEM A-arm bolts, like off the front of the machine, that you could just put back here that are, I believe, 10 millimeters longer. It's either 10 or 15, something like that. That way I still get full engagement of that nylock nut. Once you figure out where you're gonna mount the lower end of the strap, you gotta figure out the top. And I want to make sure that the strap is adjustable. So there's a few ways that you can do that. On the front of the machine, for the front limit straps, I'm using these adjustable clevises. These just go inside a piece of 3/4 120 wall DOM, and then depending on where you set the nuts right here, that's gonna change the length of your strap. So you can change how much you're limiting your travel. I had thought about using these back here, but there was no real clean way to do it. It wasn't very functional because you got like the plastic firewall in the way. You couldn't easily adjust the nuts up there. So I ended up not just welding a 3/4-inch 120 wall piece of DOM there and sliding this up through it. Because remember, you want to make sure that your mounts, whenever you're using these Clevis mounts, are in line with your limit strap whenever the strap is pulled tight down at full droop. So that means it needs to be at an angle. So you wouldn't want to mount it this way, because this is a whole bunch of force being applied to it, and you would actually bend this Clevis if you didn't have it straight. So in order to get adjustability on this rear limit strap, I ended up using these tube clamps right here. Now on the RZR, this tube is 1.5 OD. So this is 1.5 tube clamp. Now these tube clamps right here, if you get these 6-bolt ones, these are commonly anywhere from about $35 up to about $50 on the internet. The best place that I could find tube clamps like this, or the most affordable, was to get a 4-bolt design from PRP. They're right around that $25 range if I remember correctly. So what that allows you to do is you take one of these mounts. Now this is a seat belt mount as well as a limit strap mount. These are, I believe, about $5.25 or something like that if you get the Trail Gear brand. I like these Ruffstuff ones. The Ruffstuff ones, if I remember correctly, are around $6. About the only difference is a Trail Gear, this is a Ruffstuff, is the height of the hole compared to where it's going to be welded on. So I personally like the Ruffstuff ones. I also like Ruffstuff. They're local and support the off-road community a lot at all the events that I go to. So I like to support those guys. Anyways, you take one of these tube clamps. This tube clamp would go around the tube, and you just weld one of these tabs to that tube clamp. As far as the location of where you're going to put that tube clamp on here, this is where it is on the passenger side of the machine currently. And the reason why is because right up here on the passenger side is the air intake over there. So you can't put it up higher. Now on this side, there's no air intake tube, but for the lower mount here, one thing that could cause an issue is the way this firewall plastic is molded right here. It's molded to house the ECM in there. So it's super, super tight for the clamp. It might work, it might not. I would prefer to put it there just so it's symmetrical, both sides of the matching. I use the same length of limit strap on both sides. If it won't go right there, not a big deal. I will go ahead and move it up to this location and just run a longer limit strap on this side on the rear. So the first thing I need to do is actually get this is just spray paint, because this is an old clamp that I had lying around the shop here. Get this spray paint cleaned off of there and weld one of these tabs to the tube clamp. You want to make sure that you're going to weld the tab to the half of the tube clamp that is not threaded, because you're going to put this up there on the tube on the RZR, so the bolts for this tube clamp are going to go through this way, and that way you can get to them. If you actually flipped it around so that the threaded portion was the one you're going to weld this tab on this side, the plastic firewall's right there, you wouldn't be able to access the bolts for the tube clamp. So just remember, you're going to weld to the one that's not threaded. All right, so I've got the limit strap tab welded onto that tube clamp. I went ahead and hit it with some rattle can real fast, just to help prevent some rust on there. Next thing we can do is go ahead and get it mounted on the tube. Now, because I've already done the other side, I know where to actually put this tube, and it's gonna be right about here, directly underneath this clip. This clip is normally used to hold your fuel tank vent line. This is the fuel tank vent filter. Normally that is mounted down here on the firewall. I relocated it up here just so that I could lengthen some of the fuel line right here and put a rollover valve in there, so that if I ever do roll over the RZR, I don't have to worry about fuel coming out of the tank up that vent line and spilling out on the trail, maybe causing a fire or something like that. So I've rerouted mine over here. Normally it comes up this tube through that clip. So we can go ahead and get this mount on here. Like I'd mentioned before, if there's not gonna be enough room here, then I can always move this up higher on the tube and just have different limit strap links on this side compared to the other side. Hopefully I can put it right there, but we'll see because I haven't done it yet. So now that I've got the upper limit strap tab or bracket that I welded up onto the tube, I need to figure out what length of limit strap I need. I already know because I've already done the other side, but normally the way you would do that is take a tape measure and measure between both of your mounts and you'll get a number. Now there's also going to be a stretch factor. So let's say it was 24 inches. Normally a limit strap will stretch right around 1 inch per every 12 inches. So if it was 24, you would need a 22 inch strap because of those 2 inches. Now that's normally in the full size crawler world, which is different than the side-by-side world because of size and weight. The suspension, the axles, the tires, everything like that weighs quite a bit more on full-size crawlers compared to side-by-sides. So with this side-by-side right here, you're gonna need a longer strap because you're gonna have less stretch. So mine right now is right around 21.5. They come in either inch or 2 inch increments. So I'm gonna go with a 19 inch strap on my machine for the rear back here. Next up, you need to choose which brand you're gonna go with. Typically, I use one of two brands, either PRP or Ruffstuff. Like I said, I like Ruffstuff because they're local to me. I like to support those guys. Unfortunately, Ruffstuff makes their limit straps in 2 inch increments, even numbers. Like I said, I want a 19 inch limit strap, so Ruffstuff is out. Next up is the PRP strap. I've used these on another razor. I didn't have any issue with them. Both of these brands were right around that $25 or so mark per limit strap, so very affordable. PRP makes theirs in 1 inch increments, so you can get exactly the length that you're wanting. Now, if I need to, I can either lengthen or shorten it because this is adjustable by simply loosening up these bolts that go through that tube clamp and then going up or down that frame tube. Whenever you're going to measure for your limit strap, you do want to make sure that you're measuring it at full droop, so there's no weight on the machine, you got it jacked up. Me, I've already got it down, the weight of the machine is actually already down on this tire and everything like that, so that I can actually bolt it on, because you can't bolt the limit strap on there whenever your suspension is drooped out. Now for this bottom bolt, like I said, I'm gonna bolt through the end link for the sway bar through this trailing arm. This bolt right here is not quite long enough so that by the time you add the thickness of that limit strap, the nylock portion of this nut would not be engaged on the end of the bolt itself. So I picked up a couple of these bolts right here. These are actually A-arm bolts off the Turbo S. These are like 15 millimeters longer or something. So they'll work great. So 2 of those. Once you get your upper and lower bolts in there, you should just snug the nuts up on the bolt. You shouldn't actually tighten them fully yet. What you're gonna wanna do is go ahead and jack the machine back up so that your suspension flexes out and pulls that strap tight. That way the strap is nice and even on these little brackets that are actually on the end of the limit straps. Here you can see, you want them to be nice and even like that. You don't want them to be pulling like that or anything. That way it's nice and even wear on the strap. If it's like that, uneven wear, you could start to get a tear inside there. I'm not gonna do that yet. I'll go ahead and do that off camera. We'll go ahead and jump up there to the front. So what I'm gonna be doing up here is actually taking one of those limit strap tabs or harness tabs, and I'm gonna weld it directly to my upper A-arm right here. This is where I ended up mounting it on the other side, and it has worked great so far during my testing. So I'm gonna stick with it, and it's gonna go right there. Now, in order to get this welded on there, I need to get a lot of the stuff out of the way, like this brake line right here. So I'm gonna have to take off all my little brake line clips. and then get the powder coat taken off of this A-arm right here. Now, the upper mount, you have a few options depending on what machine you have. On my 17 Turbo, whenever I made the upper limit strap mounts for it, I actually put it right here and I utilized one of those tube clamps similar to what I did on the rear, and then I also utilized this Clevis. Basically, I had a 2-bolt tube clamp that would go right here because there was just enough room between this gusset and the headlight to put that tube clamp. And then took a little piece of that 3/4 120 wall DOM, welded directly to the tube clamp right there, and then this Clevis went up through it. That kept me from having to actually weld on my frame. Because these Turbo S's have the mount right here on the frame for those front bumpers normally, I have a rock mount on it right now, I cannot utilize one of those 2-bolt or 4-bolt, I should say, tube clamps up here around that frame tube. So I'm going to end up putting this piece of DOM in basically the same spot right there almost, except that it's going to be welded to the frame via a few small little pieces like this. Now, I've already cut these out because I made copies from the other side before I welded the other side on there. To actually figure out what they needed to be, I just used a piece of cardboard, did a whole bunch of test fitting, cutting till I got it just the way I wanted. I transferred it over to this steel and then I cut them out. I just used my portaband for this and a flap disc until I got it just like I wanted it. This is 7 gauge or 3/16 inch thick steel, and this distance right here is right about, I believe it's 1 1/4. So, I mean, you could buy like a piece of flat bar that was 1 1/4 inch wide, 3/16 thick, and you'd be fine. Just cut it and shape it. And then the DOM right here, I do need to cut it down. I just got a piece of scrap stock. So I'm gonna cut it, I believe, 1 3/8 inch long and clean it up. So you would need 2 of these and then 1 piece of DOM. So up here, what I'm gonna do, like I said, go ahead and get this rock light off here, get all this stuff out of the way, get this tube cleaned up, as well as get this brake line off. But I'm not gonna bore you guys showing you all that. Next up, I need to cut a piece off of this 3/4 120 wall DOM. It needs to be 1 3/8 is what I'm making it. If you don't want to buy this DOM just for something like this, you can actually buy just these short pieces of DOM or the short piece of DOM with that plate already welded to it from a few companies. I think Trail Gear sells them. Just realize you're gonna be paying a lot for something so small and simple. So if you can get your hands on some scrap DOM and then, you know, just a short piece of flat bar or whatever, you're gonna save yourself some money for sure. Now that I have that piece of DOM cut and cleaned up, and these are my little pieces that I made from my template that I made from the other side, I'm gonna go ahead and go over to the machine and just do a quick test fit and see if I can't tack weld these together, as well as clean these up to make sure they fit good on the frame tube. All right, I did a quick test fit up there, and the tube and the little tabs don't fit too bad. I am gonna have to fine tune it, but in order to get that orientation just right, I kind of need to have it in line with my lower mount. So the easiest thing to do is just go ahead and get this lower mount welded to the upper A-arm. So where I'm actually placing it is just like I did on the other side. I'm gonna weld it right over top of this weld that connects this plate to this tube. And I'm gonna line this end up with this tab right here, and I'm just gonna make sure that it's in line with the shock. That's what I did on the other side, and it has worked great so far. The other one ended up being in line just right, so might as well just repeat that. Something you want to think about if you're doing a custom limit strap setup like this is you want to make sure that your tab and your strap is not going to interfere with anything. For example, you wouldn't want to put it way out here because then chances are it's going to interfere with your tire. Even if it doesn't when it's sitting there, maybe whenever it's turned or you're going to a bump or something like that, you want to make sure that the strap is not coming into contact with anything along with your limit strap mounts. I probably did not mention it, but anytime you're welding on the side-by-side or a vehicle in general, you do want to make sure that you disconnect your battery. I have a battery disconnect switch, so I just turned it to off. That way you don't mess with any of your electrical stuff on the machine, your car, whatever the case may be that you're welding on. It's always good practice. Normally you won't have an issue as long as you have a good ground, but if you mess that ground up, then you can really cause some issues with your electrical system. Now that we have that lower tab welded to the upper A-arm, we can go ahead and get the piece of DOM welded up to our little pieces of plate that we have here, and then fine-tuned it with the flap disc until we get it at just the right orientation that we want, so that that limit strap is all perfectly in line whenever it's at droop. Once you have finished kind of fine-tuning that clevis mount, it should look something similar to this right here. So this is going to get welded right up here, and you're going to want to make sure, like I said, that it's in line with your lower mount, and you're going to want to check both directions. So you're going to want to look this way as well as look over here from the side. This is where it can definitely be helpful to have someone here to kind of hold this in place while the other person's looking at it, as well as hold it in place while one person tack welds it to the frame. But once you've gotten it tack welded on there, you know, double check that it is pretty much in line this way, because if you get it to where it's rotated too much, say up like this, all that weight is going to end up bending your clevis. And then if you actually get the angle this way too much, then you run the risk of your clevis coming into contact with your shock during compression. So there's kind of a happy medium right there, I've found, where it's almost pointed directly at it. It's almost pointed like right here, but that ensures that I don't interfere with the shock during the suspension travel. Now that it looks like it's good right there, I can go ahead and fully weld up both of these tabs to the frame tubes. All right, now that that upper clevis mount is fully welded to your frame, you can go ahead and clean it up some with a wire brush, as well as I would get a little bit of rattle can spray paint on there, because you don't want all of this rusting. Same thing with your upper A-arm right here, that tab that you welded on there. Make sure you clean up around it, as well as coat it, whether it's spray paint, if you're not going to take your suspension off, or take that A-arm, go get it repowder coated. I'm just going to rattle can it. I'm fine with that. You also need to figure out the length of your front limit strap. So in this case, this one comes out where I have this clevis adjusted right now to about 22 3/4. If you used the full size crawler math, then you would need to limit close to 2 inches, which would put you close to 21 inches. These PRP limit straps are not stretching that 1 inch per every 12 inch of strap. I think I mentioned it before, they say that they should stretch about 7/8 of an inch. The strap on the other side there looks to be about 15/16 of an inch right now is how much it's stretching. And that's with a 20-inch limit strap over there. So it's definitely not the norm of 1 per 12 inches. What I would like to do is put a 21-inch limit strap on here. Unfortunately, PRP is out of those, or was out of those at least whenever I ordered my limit straps and stuff up, and they're on back order for a good little bit. So I went ahead and picked up some 20-inch ones, and I'll run those, and then once they actually get those 20 ones in stock, I'll just order some up and swap them out. What I'm gonna do now, like I said, go ahead and clean this up and get some rattle can on there before I actually assemble, you know, getting this brake line back in place, getting this fender flare back up here, as well as get my rock light back in place. And then I can go ahead and get my tire on here, get the weight down on here so I can actually get that limit strap on there connected. Now, one of the things, I don't know if I've mentioned it, it's really nice with these Clevis style mounts is that if you really needed to, you could connect this strap up in there whenever the suspension is at full droop. And that would allow you to actually dial it in so that you're limiting the least amount of travel that you need. Because you could put it up through there so that the end of the clevis is just barely sticking through because your strap is tight, and you put your nut on there, and then you just start ratcheting it down, and it'll start stretching the strap until it meets its limit, and then it'll start pulling that suspension up. And that way you can get the suspension limit that you're looking for really dialed in, compared to how I did it on the back, where I used a tube clamp that you'd have to loosen up and move it around, because then you'd have to make sure that the weight of the vehicle is down on there. All right, as you can see, I got the razor back out of the shop. I went ahead and squirted some rattle can on those brackets that I got up front there, as well as got the bolts tightened up and everything. Just like I did the rear, make sure you let it go down to full droop before you tighten up the bolts that go through the limit strap. That way those limit straps are all nice and in line with the brackets and everything like that. I'll make sure and do some close-ups here so you guys can see it. If you guys have not done so yet, make sure you click that red button, subscribe. Also, if you guys learned something today, like the video and all that stuff, make sure you give me a like, a thumbs up. Hopefully you guys learned something today. My total cost on doing these limit straps was like $235 plus tax or something like that. So I mean, in the $250, $255 range or somewhere in there. Now I am going to have to fork over an extra $50 or so, because I'm going to have to swap out my front limit straps, because I have 20s on there now, and I'm going to go ahead and swap those out to 21s. So I gain back a little bit of my travel while keeping that clevis further up. But you know, I'll be the test bunny for you all. Remember, if you're going to use PRP limit straps in a side-by-side application, you can expect right around 7/8 to 1 inch of stretch. And that was with that 20-inch strap. Anyways, like I said, hopefully you guys like the video, and I'll catch you guys next time.